Who's going to talk about the minimum wage campaign and the effort to increase the minimum wage in Nevada.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon. I represent the committee to raise the minimum wage in Nevada. A sort of a creative name, obviously. This sort of puts it right out there. Probably in front of this group, I don't need to go into the reasons why this is so incredibly important. I'm going to anyway because it makes me feel good to see people nod and smile when I say that, as opposed to when I go into a room full of business opponents who tell me that it's the craziest possible thing you could do because you can't raise wages in a recession or when things are going well or at any other time, much like you can't raise taxes at any possible time. You know, some of this is about what sort of society you want to live in. It isn't necessarily about how much goes into the bottom line of the employer. I have no idea whether this is working. I think I'm loud enough anyway. The committee to raise the minimum wage in Nevada filed this ballot initiative in November. It would raise the minimum wage in Nevada immediately to $9.25. It would go up 75 cents a year to the year 2024, when it would reach $13. And after that, it would be tied to a cost of living index. I'm sure some of you may be thinking, well, 13, that's great. Why not more? Right? Other places around the country are fighting for 15, or Seattle's going to 18. I wouldn't disagree with you, but we are in a political process in which we have to put this on a ballot, and people have to go and vote for it, and it has to win. It has to win twice, actually, because the minimum wage in Nevada is in its constitution. And some of you may remember back in 2004 and 2006 when a ballot initiative put the minimum wage into Nevada's constitution. And that was way ahead of its time at the time, but it does make it more difficult to raise it thereafter, meaning now. And it's important now because it's now been 6 years since Nevada minimum wage workers, the lowest paid workers among us, have had a raise. 6 years. The average minimum wage worker in Nevada is getting less than 30 hours. They're not full-time workers because of the Affordable Care Act says if you average 30 hours, your employer has to give you health insurance at a certain reduced rate. Instead of embracing that, employers have said, well, then we're not going to have full-time workers anymore, are we? And so they don't. And so minimum wage workers in Nevada are getting roughly 25 hours a week. They're making $7.25 an hour, and I'll explain why they're making that instead of what they should be making in a second. And that adds up to about $180 a week. $180 a week. That's why most minimum wage workers have to work 2 and 3 jobs. And I hear from opponents of the minimum wage increase that, well, we're just talking about entry-level jobs, kids scooping ice cream. I have more than a dozen cases in my law practice regarding minimum wage violations, and most of them are class actions of upwards of 1,000 individuals involved in each case. You know, the average minimum wage worker that I know is a 47-year-old single mother with 3 jobs and 2 kids. These are not entry-level jobs where people are climbing up the ladder. I don't know where people get the idea on the other side that people start in the mailroom and become CEOs in this country. That's not what's happening. What's happening is people are clawing their way by. Living wage doesn't enter into it. These are starvation wages, is what they are. And with no time to climb a ladder when you have 3 of these jobs, it renders the situation simply unacceptable in a civilized society. So there's 2 reasons why this initiative was filed. One, because of the need to raise the wage and put more money into the pockets of minimum wage workers themselves, but also to correct what has been now an ongoing 10-year cycle of wage theft in Nevada. If you remember the 2004-2006 initiative, we actually have 2 minimum wages in Nevada. At the moment, it's $8.25 or $7.25 if your employer provides you with health insurance. What's happening is that employers are gaming the system and paying $7.25 an hour, though they're not providing real health insurance. Most of it is functionally a player's card at CVS, right? You still have to go on the exchange and buy health insurance anyway, even though you've lost the dollar. Right? So there's an entire shell game going on in which people are actually getting $7.25. Now that may not sound like much. Well, it's $1 off. It's $1 off for every hour you work. That's 12.2%. Right? There aren't many CEOs or middle managers that would take a 12.2% cut sitting down. But yet employers in Nevada take it as a matter of course from the lowest paid workers among us. Now there are between 60,000 and 100,000 minimum wage workers in Nevada.
How many years?
Between 60,000 and 100,000 because of our service economy. Many of those are food service workers. Others are landscapers or similar jobs with a sort of lack of labor power to complain or fight back even against the wage theft they're experiencing. Now, at a level of 100,000, figuring 1,500 hours a year, which is what, 30 hours a week for 50 weeks. I'll even give you 2 weeks of vacation, which none of them are getting anyway. That's $150 million being retained unlawfully by employers from the poorest among us. That's also unacceptable. And so this minimum wage amendment would abolish the two-tier system in which employers are getting away with taking this money back from their employers. And would introduce, once again, one single wage. Right? Pay that wage to all your employees for every hour they work. This is absolutely necessary in Nevada. Once again, I don't think I have to convince you. What we have to do is convince everyone else. Because I run into opposition. I've done probably 4 of these panels. I've been on radio shows. I've been on TV shows. And there's always someone on the other side from the Restaurant Association or Big Gaming or the Chamber of Commerce or whoever else it is. And I always try to start the conversation with one simple question. Sir or madam, do you believe there should be a minimum wage? And you would be surprised how many times their eyes narrow and their stomachs suck in because in their hearts what they really want to say is no. What they really want to say is no, it should be a market-based thing. Well, when times get bad enough, the market-based wage for a starving person is a bowl of soup. Right? We have decided we don't do that in this country. So they'll say yes, and I'll say, all right, well then all we're talking about are levels then. If you believe there's a minimum wage, tell me why the level we're at is okay. Or tell me why the level that we're talking about, eventually $13 an hour, is not okay, and give me specifics. But what they'll give you is the idea that, well, this will kill jobs. They can't say why. It's just going to cost more to employ people, therefore jobs will go away. Well, more money will be going into the pockets of people that necessarily, because of their circumstances, have to spend it right away. Because they've got rent due, or a car payment, right? Or they're behind on their bills. Right? So there are just as many studies, and I know how it is when you pull out the studies, that say that a minimum wage increase actually spurs the economy because of the boost in spending right away. And actually, a lot of the minimum wage jobs are at places where people without much money shop and work. So they'll be spending it in those places. But then the opponents will shift and say, well, keep raising the wage, we're going to go to automation. There's going to be kiosks everywhere. That sort of veiled threat that keep pushing it, we'll punish you for it. We'll take your jobs away entirely. We'll give them to robots. 2 things on that, if you ever hear that. Number 1, at my grocery store, there's not many cashiers left anyway. My bank doesn't have any tellers. Nobody did that because of a minimum wage increase. If anybody thinks that someone's not going to go to an automated kiosk anyway, any minute they can, that they think it's going to make them more money, I'm sorry, that's not true. But beyond that, it's a bluff. Right? Because one, our community doesn't want that. And number 2, if you have the money to make a capital outlay to automate your entire workforce, hey, you workers, what are we doing? Right? So, my basic screed isn't to convince you. I know you're convinced. It's to support, it's to help, it's to convince all those others who need to be convinced that simply raising the wage of the poorest workers among us is not negative for our society. It's an absolute positive, and I wish we could do more.
Thank you. Rob, I want to turn to you first for a follow-up question on that and answering some of the arguments. We know why business interests are opposed to raising the minimum wage. We've heard those arguments over and over. It'll kill jobs. But what about the worker that's making slightly more than minimum wage, or maybe $10 more an hour, and they fear that raising the minimum wage will somehow cut into their wages and how much income they're bringing home? How do you answer that, and what's a good way for us to frame that argument when talking about how increasing the minimum wage will increase wages for everybody?
Well, I mean, I think it's a question of all boats rising. I mean, if it's true that a minimum wage increase will put money in the pockets of people who need to spend it or save it as well. I mean, we talked about losing $1,500 a year. You get that extra $1,500 a year in your pocket for 18 years. Maybe your kid can go to college, right? Maybe you can buy a car so you don't have to take the bus, which cuts your time away from your kids down by 2 hours a day. So for someone in that situation who's thinking, okay, I'm making just above minimum wage, is someone going to leap above me, or am I going to be dragged down to their level? It seems to me that there's an argument that all boats are going to rise, right? If in fact this is a positive for the economy, not just for the profit of the employer, but for the bottom lines of individual families, it'll be a good thing for all families. And so the way to frame it, I think, is this is good for everyone, right? And of course, many union contracts or prevailing wages are tied to the minimum wage. They will automatically go up, right? Which is another argument that the opposition will use, that this is a very dangerous thing. But yes, it is a very dangerous thing. It's very dangerous for you. Very dangerous.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.